Welcome to Myth Junkie, where we discuss different myths and monsters. Let's talk about not deer. By the way, this is not only my research and an explanation on the not deer, but it is also going to include at the end a section dedicated to people's encounters, so stay tuned for that. The not deer was very interesting and kind of difficult to research because, as said by Rowan Bagley in her article Appalachian Not Deer, there isn't much written information about not deer because so many stories about them have been passed down orally or through folklore, the details of which vary. I think the possibility of them is fascinating, even more so because there's a real-world explanation for their existence. I highly suggest reading Rowan's article, which can be found at notdeermagazine.com. Not deer can best be described as looking very similar to deer but having something wrong about them. If you were to briefly glance at it, you would probably mistake it for a regular deer, but as soon as you look a little closer, things just seem off. The most easy to spot attributes of the not deer that make them unsettling are backwards joints, too many eyes, too wide of a mouth, and wolf-like teeth. There are also some that are less easy to spot, like too far forward-facing eyes, too big ears, maybe different eye placement in the sense of predator versus prey. Other differences are in behavior. Not deer aren't afraid of people, and in fact have been known to make heavy eye contact. Most regular deer are afraid of people, and if they aren't outright afraid, they're still nervous. A way to explain why not deer freak us out so much is the phenomenon of uncanny valley. Though this phenomenon is usually reserved for humans and things looking like us, it seems to also transfer to things we see often. As an example, if someone that hasn't seen a deer often came in contact with a not deer, they'd probably be less freaked out than someone that has been around a deer a lot. The reasoning behind this is that it would be easier for someone that has experience with deer to spot the differences between not deer and real deer, which would then make them experience uncanny valley. When the not deer looks more and more like an actual deer to where there's only a little bit of it that's off, it fills us with dread and fear. Our instincts are telling us something is wrong. Another example of uncanny valley with animals is the restoration of the Ghent altarpiece. Before the restoration, the image of the sheep looked like a normal, regular sheep minus the extra set of ears. After restoration, it was revealed that the original sheep had been painted over. This original sheep has lower hanging ears, a nose that seems to be longer and more upturned, and forward-facing eyes. In just a minute, I'll get into the differences between predator and prey eyes, but I'd like you to keep in mind that this sheep has the eyes of a predator. As soon as the original painting was restored, many people said that the original sheep is very off-putting, and some even suggested repainting it to look like the sheep before the restoration. This has helped push the theory that uncanny valley applies to animals too. Something I find interesting is there are specific differences in our perception of things not being what they should be. I believe it was explained best by Hello Kitty Senpai on Tumblr. There is a specific and terrifying difference between never were monsters and are not anymore monsters. The thing was not a deer implies a creature which mimics a deer but imperfectly, and the details which are wrong are what makes it terrifying. The thing that was not a deer anymore, on the other hand, implies a thing that used to be a deer before it was somehow mutated, possessed, parasitically controlled, or reanimated improperly. And what makes that terrifying is the details that are still right and recognizable poking out of all the wrong and horrible malformations. Later, Hello Kitty Senpai added on another classification. The thing which was no longer a deer and maybe never was implies a creature that at first glance completely appears to be a deer but over time degrades very slowly until you realize, probably too late, that it is not a deer anymore, and had you seen it in this state at first, you wouldn't have recognized it as a deer at all. And there's a decent chance that it was never actually deer to begin with, but only a very good mimic, and what makes this one scary is the slow change from everything being right to everything being wrong, happening slowly enough that you don't even notice it until it's too late, as well as the fact that something now so clearly not a deer could have fooled you to begin with. Hello Kitty Senpai's post gives a very interesting view on not deer, as most reported sightings would classify the not deer as no longer but maybe never was monster. Most people encounter with the cryptid have them thinking at first it's a regular deer but steadily realizing it's really not a normal deer. As said in the post, the steady realization that something is wrong is what makes the not deer terrifying. Now, I'd like to get into more detail about the differences that separate not deer from regular deer. Let's start off with the behavior differences and possible explanation for them. Not deer, as previously mentioned, aren't afraid of people. They are also said to make clicking noises and walk with uncomfortable jerking motions. These behaviors can be explained by CWD, or chronic wasting disease. CWD is an always fatal contagious neurological disease that affects deer, elk, and moose. It causes a spongy degeneration of the brain, which results in abnormal behavior, emancipation, loss of bodily functions, and death. Other symptoms include listlessness, drooling, aggression, stumbling, and a lack of fear of people. This disease is believed to be caused by prions, which are abnormal proteins that are thought to lead to brain and neurological damage. It'd also be good to note that other deer don't respond differently to deer with CWD, which is similar to people saying that deer don't react to not deer that are in their herd. While CWD can be used to explain the behavior of not deer, it can't fully explain the physical differences. Some of the ones I mentioned at the start are backwards joints, too many eyes, too far forward eyes, too wide of a mouth, wolf-like teeth, too big ears, and different eye placement in the sense of predator versus prey. To go into detail, deer joints can best be described as the front and back leg shoulder joints being arrows that point outward, though the next joints down being arrows that point inward, and that the next joint arrows pointing outward. Finally, the ankle joints all extending the hoof towards the front of the body. Not deer, however, could have all those arrows flipped, or all being mainly facing the front of the body, which means the leg joints would bend the same direction as our legs, or facing the back of the body, which would be them bending the opposite direction of our legs. A very often referenced feature of not deer are their two wide mounts and their two sharp teeth. Most deer have mounts that only extend a few inches and stop before they can be directly below the deer's eyes. Not deer is described as having the mounts of wolves. A wolf's mouth usually extends until the corner of its mouth is directly under its eyes. While some wolves have mounts that extend a shorter distance than that, the distance is still more than what a deer's mount should extend. As for the teeth, I think it's quite obvious that there's a difference between the teeth of a dog and the teeth of a deer. Dog teeth are sharp and meant for tearing, while deer teeth are flatter and meant to grind their food. Something that I'd like to draw your attention to is the differences between deer and not deer have a lot in common with predator versus prey animal differences, which brings me to eye placement. I previously brought up an uncanny valley example about the Ghent altarpiece having the eyes of a predator. What I meant by that is predator eyes are usually more forward-facing so they can focus and target any prey. Prey animals have eyes that are on the sides of their head so they can have a larger field of vision that allows them to notice predators that may be sneaking up on or approaching them. Deer have eyes that are more sideways facing, labeling them prey. Not deer may have eyes that are more forward-facing, which would hint that they are predators. Adding on that they are said to have the mouths of wolves, which are designed for hunting and tearing, makes it seem like not deer would be classified as predators. And possibly carnivores. Now, before I wrap this up, I'm going to talk about where not deer are usually spotted and share a little advice from some folks from the Appalachian Mountains. Not deer are most commonly found in the foothills of Virginia, but they have also been spotted in the southern parts of America and generally along the Appalachian Mountains. Most of the time they're spotted at night or in the early mornings and late evenings when visibility is low. However, there have been reporting sightings that happened in the middle of the day with higher visibility. Taking into account that they aren't afraid of people, they can either be in the woods or around roads and people's houses. Finally, some advice if you're planning to go to the Appalachian Mountains. I'm going to quote Abby_Sabota from TikTok because she gets straight to the point and she's grown up in Appalachia. So here's the advice. Don't go out at night. If you do go out at night, don't look into the trees. If you see something in the trees, no you don't. Don't look at them, don't acknowledge them, look away, walk away. If you hear something, if something's screaming, if you hear your name, no you don't, turn around, walk away, look away. If you hear footsteps, could be a bear, could be a deer, could be something else. Turn away, look away, walk away. Basically, if you see something, no you didn't, you should walk away. Now is on to the part of our video where I talk about encounters people have had with not deer. I have 5 specific ones that I've picked out from comments that I've been given. So here we go. Our first encounter is from Jesus Christ, but a misspelled version of the name. So let's get into it. I've seen one. It was late afternoon. The sun was setting. I was sitting in a pavilion by a trail. About a half hour after I sat down to smoke, a female deer looks at me from the distance. I think nothing of it at first, and I keep smoking. But then she comes closer and closer. At the time, I didn't know exactly what I was looking at. I wasn't particularly scared since it was about 6 in the afternoon and the sun hadn't started setting yet. So visibility was good, but she kept coming closer. This freaked me out quite a bit since deer are quite skittish. For the rest of the time I was there, I looked into its cold eyes. They were front-facing, which I didn't really notice at the time. After that, I left. turning around to make sure it didn't run after me on its hind legs, since at the time I thought it might be a skinwalker, since deer don't act like that. But then something weird happened. It followed me about halfway down the trail. It was sniffing around the pavilion the first time I looked back, and the second it was waiting in some tall grass. I noped out of there, got in my car, and just booked it. I didn't go outside for the rest of the night for the fear of what at the time could have been anything. But now I know it was either a not deer or just a deer with a brain rot. Either way, it scared the crap out of me. Our next encounter comes from Kat Von Hack. I was camping along the foothills in North Georgia at Lake Lanier. I shower late at night when camping because it's just me and my dog, and dogs aren't allowed in most bathrooms. I have a headlamp I wear to see, and I saw eyes of something in one of the many empty campsites. It was clearly a deer, but I couldn't stop looking at it because it seemed more like a coyote, but it was too big to be a coyote. My dog was off leash, and I quickly grabbed him before he noticed it and put him on a leash and walked on. I decided it had to have been a deer. Shortly after that, I learned what a not deer is, and honestly, this had to have been one. It didn't come after me or mess with me during the night. We were totally alone at that place, no other campers. I like to believe because I try to coexist peacefully in nature and clean up trash along the lake, maybe I'm not on its crap list. I still go camping alone. Our next encounters comes from a person that I'm assuming their name is pronounced Gabriella. Warning, this is a very long story, so hold tight, please. I saw one in 2016. I was driving at like 11 p.m. on a rural road in northwest Connecticut and saw from a distance a cop car with its lights on pulled up beside another car parked on the side of the road. It was weird that the cop was parked parallel to the other car and talking to the man through their windows instead of him parking behind the car and getting out. I overheard through my window a piece of the conversation where the guy told the cop, "Man, it's spooky. I didn't even hit it. I just found it like this. Something isn't right." I noticed then that the two cars were parked beside a deer that appeared to have been hit right and was sitting right on the yellow line in the road, like it'd been placed there. The creepiest part about it was the fact that it was sitting crisscross applesauce, with its legs all contorted in a way that looked like it had to been manipulated by someone to be physically possible. The pavement around the deer was drenched with a liquid that I thought was blood at first, until my lights hit it and showed it was actually an insane amount of foamy saliva that had collected all around the ground from its mouth. It was a literal pool. The closer I got, this weirdly paralyzing fear came over me, like I was too close to something I shouldn't have been. Because of how the cars were both parked, the lane I was traveling on was blocked, so I veered into the opposite one to go around the deer and just get away from it all. As I pulled up to the deer slowly, as to make sure the cop didn't say anything to me, my heart was racing with uncontrollable fear. It felt like I shouldn't look out my passenger window at the thing as I passed by it, but I couldn't help it. When I got directly in alignment with the animal, its head, still fully cascading foam and spit, jolted around to stare me dead in the eyes. I literally couldn't move a muscle. I just sat there for what felt like minutes, probably just seconds, paralyzed by fear and weirdly hypnotized feeling by the eyes. They were not normal deer eyes. They were blacker than shadow and made every hair on my body stand up. This thing was literally staring into my soul, and it scared me crapless. The whole picture of it wasn't right. The legs all contorted and folded in impossible ways, the pull of spit coming out of its mouth, and the way it just looked right into my eyes, like it knew what it was doing or had intentions or something. I snapped out of it and drove on baffled, terrified, and seeking any explanation. Went home and Googled stuff and found out about that diseases deer get that makes them act weird and the not a deer phenomenon. The logical side of my brain wanted to chalk it all up to a diseased deer, but the part of me that physically felt and saw the thing knew there was more to it than that. Its legs and the way it turned its whole head to stare at me with those cold black eyes right into my eyes was just transcendently petrifying and intuitively off. I don't know what I experienced that night, but I'll never forget that feeling and sight. Our next encounter comes from Wacko Productions. My uncle told me a story of a deer acting very strange when he was out hunting. Mind you, I live in Ireland, but anyway, the story was he had been out hunting for about 12 hours and he'd so far shot 3 deer. Wasn't a very good hunt, but he said that the last deer he came across noticed him before he noticed it. So he kind of backed up a bit as it was staring straight into his soul, and he pulls out his rifle, and the deer's eyes were just pure white. No pupils, just empty whiteness. It was like he was already dead. So my uncle goes to pull the trigger, but for some reason he felt like he couldn't, and the deer just kept moving closer and closer. So my uncle says, forget that. I'm not hanging around to see what happens next. He books it back to his van, only to look in the mirror, and the deer is about 30 feet behind the van, staring straight at it. To this day, my uncle hasn't been hunting and refuses to go back into that forest. Our next encounter is from Censored. As a mailman in South Carolina and Kentucky, I've seen deer acting weird. I ran across a doe and a buck standing beside a road once. They just watched me stop at a mailbox at the end of the gravel road. I didn't think too much of it till I had seen 10 or so bucks staring at me on the left side of the road. They started walking closer to my truck, and so did the other 2 on my right side. It always bothered me because they usually run. Can you explain what happened? I've never felt dread from a deer. These didn't act like deer. I felt like I was being ambushed by them. Deer don't act like that. I've never told any of my coworkers or friends. No one would believe me. That brings this list of encounters to an end. I would like to add to the research part real quick though. From hearing all these stories and kind of analyzing them, it is very obvious to kind of see that the not deer send such fear coursing through us that it can either, it sets off our fight or flight. And that's just so insane to me. So, yeah, anyway. To bring this to a close, the not deer is a pretty interesting and scary cryptid. Despite that, I'm still going to laugh at the mental image of a deer walking on 2 legs. I, of course, encourage you all to look into the not deer and other cryptids yourself to hear about people's encounters and to get more information, and I hope you enjoyed this. This has been Myth Junkies. Till next time, my fellow nerds.